After a fleeting encounter, she raises a son alone. Years later, she meets a CEO who looks just like her child. Is fate bringing them back together? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. In the bustling streets of Seoul, Sora sat at her favorite cafe, the steam from her Americano rising as she found herself lost in memories of that fateful night 6 years ago. The corporate party had been nothing special at first, just another networking event she'd attended to advance her career in advertising. The elegant venue, decorated with crystal chandeliers and flowing champagne, set the stage for what would become a life-changing encounter. She remembered watching the snow fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows when he approached. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. Their conversation flowed naturally, moving from work to personal interests, dreams, and aspirations. He never mentioned his name or position, and she never asked, caught up in the magic of their connection. They spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing stories until the early hours of the morning. The night ended with a promise to meet again, but fate had other plans. Now, 6 years later, Sora's life revolved around a different kind of joy, her 5-year-old son, Ji-hoon. The morning routine had become a well-choreographed dance, preparing breakfast, helping him dress for school, and making sure he had everything needed for his advanced classes. Ji-hoon wasn't just smart, he was exceptional. At 5, he could already solve complex mathematical problems meant for children twice his age. Today was special. Ji-hoon had won first place in the regional mathematics competition, competing against 3rd graders. Sora watched from the audience as her small son confidently walked onto the stage, his round glasses slightly too big for his face, accepting the golden trophy that seemed almost as tall as him. The pride she felt was overwhelming, yet tinged with a familiar sadness. That evening, as they sat together on their modest apartment's balcony, sharing ice cream to celebrate his victory, Ji-hoon asked the question she had been dreading. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" His voice was small but clear, his eyes showing wisdom beyond his years. Sora set down her ice cream cup, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes families look different, Ji-hoon. Some have 2 parents, some have 1, and some have grandparents raising them. What matters is the love we have for each other." But Ji-hoon, ever perceptive, pressed on. "But what was he like? Did he like math like me?" Sora pulled her son close, fighting back tears. "Your father was brilliant and kind. He had a way of making everyone around him feel special." She paused, remembering the mysterious man's gentle smile. "And yes, he loved numbers and puzzles just like you."
Ji-hoon snuggled closer.
"Do you think he would be proud of my trophy?" "He would be incredibly proud," Sora whispered, her heart aching. "Just like I am." Later that night, after tucking Ji-hoon into bed, Sora sat at her desk reviewing work documents. Her successful career in advertising allowed them a comfortable life, but she constantly pushed herself to provide more for Ji-hoon. His private school tuition and advanced programs weren't cheap, but seeing him thrive made every sacrifice worthwhile. She glanced at the collection of awards and certificates already accumulating on Ji-hoon's wall. Each one represented not just his achievements, but their journey together as a small family of 2. Sora had promised herself the day she discovered her pregnancy that she would give Ji-hoon the best possible life, even if it meant doing it alone. The mystery man from that night had disappeared completely, leaving no trace to follow. Sometimes Sora wondered if she should have tried harder to find him, but fear and pride held her back. Fear of rejection, fear of disrupting Ji-hoon's stable life, and pride in the independent life she had built for them. As she prepared for bed, Sora touched the small photo frame on her nightstand. A picture of Ji-hoon at his first day of school, beaming with excitement. She had given him life, but in many ways, he had given her purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she found peace in knowing that their love for each other was enough. The advertising agency's conference room buzzed with nervous energy as Sora reviewed her presentation one final time. This pitch could transform their mid-sized agency into a major player in Seoul's competitive advertising landscape. The client, Tech Innovations Corp., was known for their revolutionary products and equally demanding standards. Sora had spent weeks perfecting every detail of the campaign. Her team arranged marketing boards along the walls, each displaying potential advertising concepts for Tech Innovations' new smart home system. Sora adjusted her blazer, checking her reflection in her phone screen. At 32, she had earned her position as creative director through relentless dedication, often working late into the night after Ji-hoon was asleep. The door opened and conversation ceased. Tae-hyun Kim, Tech Innovations CEO, entered with his entourage of executives. Sora's breath caught in her throat. There was something familiar about him that she couldn't place. He carried himself with natural authority, his presence commanding attention without effort. But it was his eyes that struck her, sharp, intelligent, and somehow reminiscent of Ji-hoon's thoughtful gaze. During the presentation, Sora maintained her professional composure despite the unsettling feeling in her stomach. She walked the group through their campaign strategy, explaining how they would position Tech Innovations' product as not just innovative, but essential to modern family life. Throughout her speech, she noticed Tae-hyun watching her intently, his expression unreadable. "Your approach is interesting," he said during the Q&A session, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised her. "You focused on emotional connection rather than technical specifications. Why?" Sora met his gaze directly. "Because people don't buy technology, they buy better lives for their families. Your smart home system isn't just about convenience, it's about giving people more time with their loved ones." A slight smile crossed Taehyun's face, and for a moment, Sora felt that strange recognition again. The way he tilted his head when considering her words, the subtle arch of his eyebrow, these gestures mirrored her son's mannerisms so precisely it was unnerving. After the presentation, as her team cleared the room, Sora found herself studying Taehyun's profile while he spoke with his executives. The resemblance to Ji-hoon became more apparent. The same high cheekbones, the identical way they pushed their glasses up their nose when deep in thought. The realization made her dizzy. Her colleague Minji noticed her staring. "He's quite handsome, isn't he? And single, according to the gossip magazines." Sora barely heard her. Her mind raced through calculations and possibilities. Ji-hoon's age, the timing of that party 6 years ago, the familiar features, it couldn't be coincidence, could it? But Seoul was a city of millions. Surely the resemblance was just her imagination playing tricks. "Miss Park." Taehyun's voice interrupted her thoughts. He had approached without her noticing. "I'd like to discuss some aspects of your proposal in more detail. Would you have time for a meeting next week?" Up close, the similarities were even more striking. Sora forced herself to maintain her professional demeanor despite her racing heart. "Of course, Mr. Kim. I'll have my assistant coordinate with your office." As she gathered her materials, Sora's hands trembled slightly. The implications of what she was saying threatened to overwhelm her. If her suspicions were correct, the man standing before her, one of Seoul's most influential business leaders, could be Ji-hoon's father. The thought seemed absurd, yet the evidence was literally staring her in the face. Walking back to her office, Sora felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift. She had built a life for herself and Ji-hoon, one that was stable and predictable. Now, with one meeting, everything she thought she knew was being called into question. The prospect terrified her, not just for herself, but for Ji-hoon, who had never known the emptiness of having his father walk away. The private meeting with Tae-hyun took place in his corner office at Tech Innovations headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul's skyline, but Sora barely noticed the vista. She sat across from him, acutely aware of every gesture and expression that reminded her of Ji-hoon. "Your campaign proposal was exceptional," Tae-hyun began, his fingers drumming lightly on his desk, another gesture that mirrored her son's habits. "But I'm curious about something. The family-centered approach seems deeply personal to you. Why is that?" Sora chose her words carefully. "I believe in creating advertising that resonates with real experiences. As a single mother, I understand the value of technology that truly serves family needs." Taehyun's expression shifted subtly at the mention of single motherhood. A challenging role, I imagine. How do you balance it with your career? My son is my motivation, Sora replied, watching his reactions closely. He's quite remarkable, actually, just won the regional mathematics competition. He's only 5 but competed against third graders. Impressive, Taehyun smiled, genuine interest showing in his eyes. I have a particular fondness for mathematics myself. Started coding when I was very young. The conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on various subjects. Taehyun shared stories about his own childhood passion for problem-solving, which had led to founding Tech Innovations. Every anecdote seemed to parallel Ji-hoon's interests and abilities so closely that Sora felt increasingly unsettled. Later that week, Ji-hoon burst into their apartment after school, clutching a colorful flyer.
Mom.
Tech Innovations is sponsoring our school's science fair. Mr. Kim is going to be there as a special guest. His excitement was palpable as he thrust the paper toward her. Sora's stomach tightened as she read the announcement. Ji-hoon continued, barely containing his enthusiasm. Everyone's talking about him. Did you know he built his first computer when he was 7? That's only 2 years older than me. Can we invite him to see my project? Please? Looking at her son's hopeful face, Sora felt trapped. Ji-hoon had already developed an admiration for Taehyun, even without knowing the possible connection between them. His eyes shone with the same intensity they did whenever he solved a particularly challenging math problem. Honey, Mr. Kim is a very busy person, she began, but Ji-hoon's face fell immediately. But you work with him now, right? My project is about artificial intelligence. That's what his company does. Please, Mom. I've been working so hard on it. Sora sat down, pulling Ji-hoon close. Why is this so important to you? Ji-hoon's voice grew quiet. Because he's like me. The other kids think I'm weird for loving math and computers, but Mr. Kim made a whole company from it. And he hesitated. Maybe he could be like a dad? Just for the science fair? The innocent request hit Sora like a physical blow. She had always known Ji-hoon yearned for a father figure, but hearing him voice it so directly, and in connection to Taehyun of all people, made her heart ache. After much internal debate, Sora agreed to extend the invitation, knowing it could open doors she had kept firmly shut for years. That evening, she said and deleted several emails before finally sending a brief, professional message to Taehyun about Ji-hoon's project. His response came surprisingly quickly. I would be honored to see your son's project. His interest in AI at such a young age is remarkable. Perhaps we could discuss it over coffee after the science fair? Sora stared at the response, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She was about to set in motion events that could change their lives forever. With a deep breath, she typed her agreement, knowing that the carefully maintained boundaries between her past and present were about to blur. The elementary school gymnasium buzzed with excitement on the day of the science fair. Ji-hoon stood proudly beside his display, a sophisticated AI program he'd created to recognize and categorize different types of plants. He'd spent weeks perfecting the algorithm, often working late into the night while Sora watched with a mixture of pride and concern at his intense focus, another trait he shared with his potential father. When Taehyun arrived, the entire atmosphere in the gymnasium shifted. Parents and teachers whispered and pointed, but he seemed focused solely on the projects, stopping to speak with each student. As he approached Ji-hoon's display, Sora observed from a distance, her heart pounding. So, you must be Ji-hoon, Taehyun said, adjusting his glasses in that familiar way. Tell me about your project. Ji-hoon launched into his explanation with confidence, his small hands gesturing animatedly as he demonstrated how his program worked. Taehyun listened intently, asking detailed questions that showed genuine interest. Their interaction was natural, almost as if they'd known each other for years. Your understanding of neural networks is remarkable for someone your age, Taehyun commented, clearly impressed. Who taught you about AI? I learned mostly from online courses, Ji-hoon beamed. Mom got me a computer and supported my interest, even though she says I sometimes need to remember to sleep. Taehyun laughed, glancing at Sora with appreciation. That sounds familiar. My mother used to say the same thing to me. The science fair judges announced the winners, and Ji-hoon's project won first place. As he accepted his award, Tae-hyun turned to Sora. He's extraordinary. You must be very proud. I am, she replied softly, watching Ji-hoon clutch his trophy with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for his mathematics award. After the event, they found themselves at a quiet cafe nearby. Ji-hoon had gone home with Sora's mother, leaving the adults to talk. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their table as they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Your son reminds me of myself at that age, Tae-hyun said finally. The same curiosity, the same drive to understand how things work. Sora wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking warmth. It's remarkable, isn't it? How certain traits can be so inherited. The word hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Tae-hyun's expression grew thoughtful. Life has interesting ways of bringing people together, doesn't it? Before Sora could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. The agency was in chaos. Rumors were spreading about a potential hostile takeover attempt of their biggest client. The message mentioned emergency meetings and possible contract terminations. I'm sorry, but I need to go. Sora stood abruptly, gathering her things. There's an emergency at work. Let me help, Tae-hyun offered, also standing. I have experience with corporate crises. Thank you, but I should handle this myself, Sora replied, already moving toward the door. It's better to keep some boundaries clear. As she hurried out of the cafe, Sora could feel Tae-hyun's eyes on her back. She had allowed herself to get too comfortable, too close to revealing truths she'd kept buried for years. The work crisis was real, but it also provided an escape from a conversation she wasn't ready to have. In her taxi to the office, Sora's phone lit up with another message, this time from Tae-hyun. Whatever challenges you're facing, you don't have to face them alone. Some boundaries are meant to be crossed. The agency's halls buzzed with whispered conversations as Sora arrived. Her team gathered around her desk, faces tense with concern. The source of the chaos quickly became clear. Ji-hoon, her former colleague who had left the agency 6 months ago, had been spreading damaging information about Sora's past to potential clients. Sora found the anonymous emails Ji-hoon had sent to board members and clients. They hinted at questionable behavior during company events and suggested that Sora's rapid rise in the agency was due to personal relationships rather than merit. But the most disturbing part was a reference to secrets about her child's father that could damage the agency's reputation. After dismissing her concerned team, Sora sat alone in her office, hands shaking as she dialed Ji-hoon's number. To her surprise, Ji-hoon answered on the first ring, as if waiting for the call. I wondered how long it would take you to contact me. Ji-hoon's voice dripped with satisfaction. Seeing you with Tae-hyun Kim at the science fair made me realize it was time for the truth to come out. What truth? Sora kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. I was there that night, Sora. The corporate party 6 years ago. I saw you leave with him. The man who became one of Seoul's most powerful CEOs. I saw how you pursued him, how you planned everything. Sora's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Don't play innocent. Ji-hoon laughed bitterly. You knew exactly who he was that night. You engineered that meeting, waited until he was drunk enough to be vulnerable. I have photos, Sora. Photos of you following him around all evening, calculating your moment. The accusation hit Sora like a physical blow. That's not what happened. I didn't even know his name save it. Ji-hoon cut her off. I watched you build your perfect single mother narrative, playing on everyone's sympathy. But it was all calculated, wasn't it? And now you're trying to work your way back into his life through this advertising contract. Sora gripped her desk, memories of that night flooding back. She remembered the genuine connection, the shared laughter, the natural progression of their evening together. There had been no calculation, no ulterior motives. Why are you doing this? Sora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you don't deserve any of this. Ji-hoon spat. The promotion that should have been mine, the respect you've gained through deception. Unless you step down from the Tech Innovations account, everyone will know the truth about your relationship with Taehyun Kim. After hanging up, Sora sat in her darkened office, Ji-hoon's threats echoing in her mind. The photos, even if they existed, would show nothing improper. But the implication alone could destroy everything she'd built, her career, her reputation, and most importantly, the stable life she'd created for Ji-hoon. Her phone buzzed with a message from Taehyun. "Are you okay? I heard about some rumors circulating." Sora stared at the message, realizing that her past and present were colliding in ways she couldn't control. She had two choices: retreat and give in to Ji-hoon's demands, or stand her ground and face whatever consequences might come. The following week, Sora found herself in Taehyun's office again, ostensibly to discuss the advertising campaign. The city lights twinkled outside as evening set in, creating an intimate atmosphere she tried to ignore. "The rumors don't concern me," Taehyun said directly, breaking the professional pretense. "But I'm worried about how they're affecting you and Ji-hoon." Sora set down her presentation materials, exhaustion evident in her posture. "I've built everything in my life on my own merit. To have someone suggest otherwise." "You don't have to defend yourself to me," Taehyun interrupted gently. "I've seen your work, your dedication, and more importantly, I've seen how you've raised Ji-hoon." The mention of her son made Sora's throat tight. "He's everything to me. These rumors, if they spread further, could affect him too." "Then let me help." Taehyun moved closer, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "Tech Innovations can issue a statement supporting you and the agency. We can make it clear that your position was earned through talent alone." "Why would you do that?" Sora asked, meeting his eyes. "Because I see something in you that reminds me of myself. The determination to succeed on your own terms, the willingness to sacrifice everything for what matters most." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "And because every time I see Ji-hoon, I can't help but wonder." The unfinished sentence hung between them. Sora felt the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. "He asks about you, you know. After the science fair, he talks about you constantly." Taehyun's expression softened. "He's a remarkable child. His intelligence, his mannerisms." He left the observation unfinished, but its implication was clear. At home that evening, Ji-hoon sat at the dinner table, pushing his food around his plate. "Mom, can Mr. Kim come to my piano recital next month?" Sora nearly dropped her chopsticks. "Honey, I don't think dash, please." Ji-hoon interrupted, his eyes pleading. "He said he played piano too when he was young. And all the other kids have their dads coming." "Ji-hoon," Sora began gently. "Mr. Kim isn't dash. I know he's not my dad." Ji-hoon cut in, his voice small but determined. "But sometimes when he explains things to me, it feels like maybe he could be. Is that wrong?" Sora felt her heart breaking at her son's words. She watched as he returned to his dinner, shoulders slightly slumped, looking so much like Taehyun in his moments of deep thought that it physically hurt. Later that night, after Ji-hoon was asleep, Sora received a text from Taehyun. "I remember playing Chopin's Nocturnes at my first recital." Ji-hoon mentioned he's preparing the same piece. Some things run deeper than chance, don't they? The message left Sora staring at her phone, tears blurring her vision. The walls she'd built to protect herself and Ji-hoon were crumbling, and she wasn't sure whether to reinforce them or let them fall. During a routine background check on potential business partners, Sora's assistant uncovered something unexpected. The Kim family, particularly Taehyun's father, had a long-standing feud with Sora's family. The conflict dated back 20 years, when both families were involved in the early days of Korea's tech boom. Sora sat in her office, reading through old newspaper articles. The headlines told a story of betrayal and corporate espionage. Park Industries accused of stealing Kim Technology's trade secrets. The case had eventually been dismissed, but not before Sora's father's reputation was destroyed. He had died shortly after, leaving their family in financial ruin. Her phone buzzed, another message from Taehyun requesting dinner to discuss personal matters. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, potentially falling for the son of the man who had accused her father of being a thief. During her lunch break, Sora visited her mother, seeking answers. The elderly woman's face darkened at the mention of the Kim family. "So you've discovered it," her mother said, pouring tea with trembling hands. "I wondered if this would surface when I saw that man at Ji-hoon's science fair." "Did father really steal from them?" Sora asked directly. Her mother's eyes flashed. "Your father was innocent." Kim Sung-ho, Taehyun's father, fabricated evidence because he couldn't accept that your father had developed better technology. The lawsuit was dropped because they "I'll prove anything," but by then, she trailed off, tears forming. "By then, the damage was done," Sora finished quietly. "Your father died believing no one would ever know the truth. And now you're working with Sung-ho's son." Her mother's voice carried years of buried pain. Sora thought about Taehyun, about how different he seemed from the ruthless family portrait painted in the articles. "He's not his father." "No," her mother agreed surprisingly. "From what I've read, he built his company from scratch, refused his father's help. Perhaps he's different. But Sora..." She gripped her daughter's hand. "Be careful. These old wounds run deep." That evening, as Sora worked late at the office, she received an unexpected visit. Taehyun's father, Kim Sung-ho himself, stood in her doorway. He'd aged since the photos from the lawsuit, but his commanding presence remained unchanged. "Miss Park," his voice was cold. "I understand you've been spending time with my son." Sora stood, channeling her mother's strength. "Mr. Kim, this is highly inappropriate." "What's inappropriate is a Park trying to worm their way into my family again." His eyes narrowed. "Your father tried to destroy us once. I won't let his daughter finish the job." "My father was innocent," Sora said firmly, though her heart raced. "Innocent?" He laughed harshly. "Is that what you tell yourself? Is that what you'll tell your son when he learns his grandfather was a thief?" The mention of Ji-hoon sparked something fierce in Sora. "Don't you dare bring my son into this." "Your son?" His smile was cruel. "Or should I say my grandson?" The agency's quarterly review meeting became the stage for Ji-hoon's attempted takedown. As Sora presented the Tech Innovations campaign results, Ji-hoon burst into the conference room, tablet in hand. "Before we continue," Ji-hoon announced to the stunned room, "everyone should see who our creative director really is." She connected her tablet to the projector, pulling up photos from the corporate party 6 years ago. The images showed Sora and Taehyun talking, laughing, sharing drinks. Nothing compromising, nothing scandalous, just two people enjoying each other's company. But Ji-hoon's narrative twisted each innocent moment. "She orchestrated this entire relationship," Ji-hoon declared. "From that night to now, everything has been calculated to advance her career." Sora stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Is that what you see in these photos, Ji-hoon? Because I see two young people having a genuine connection. I see the father of my child, though I didn't know who he was that night. And yes, I see the man whose company we're now working with, not because of manipulation, but because of the quality of our work." The room fell silent. Taehyun, who had been sitting quietly in the corner observing the presentation, stood up. "Ms. Lee," he addressed Ji-hoon, "do you know what I see in these photos? I see the woman I've been trying to find for 6 years." Ji-hoon's confident expression faltered. Taehyun continued, "That night, I left early for a family emergency. When I returned, Sora was gone. I had no way to contact her, no last name, nothing. I never knew." He paused, emotion evident in his voice. "I never knew I had a son." From the doorway came a small gasp. Ji-hoon stood there, having arrived early for his planned lunch with his mother. His eyes were wide behind his glasses, darting between Taehyun and Sora. "Mom," his voice quavered. "Is Mr. Kim my father?" The room erupted in whispers. Ji-hoon's tablet clattered to the floor, her revenge plot backfiring spectacularly. Sora moved quickly to Ji-hoon, kneeling before him. "Honey, we should talk about this privately. No," Ji-hoon said firmly, showing a maturity beyond his years. "I want to know now. Is that why we look alike? Why we think the same way? Why he understands me so well? Taehyun approached them slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. Ji-hoon, he said awfully, I would very much like to talk with you and your mother about this, but only if you both want to. Ji-hoon looked at his mother, then back at Taehyun. The resemblance between them, now acknowledged openly, was striking. The board members and executives watched in stunned silence as this personal drama unfolded. The days following the confrontation brought a heavy silence to Sora's apartment. Ji-hoon spent hours in his room, emerging only for meals and school. His normally chatty nature had been replaced by thoughtful silence and long stares at the family photos on their walls, photos that now seemed incomplete to him. One evening, as Sora helped him with homework, Ji-hoon suddenly put down his pencil. I've been thinking, he said, his voice serious. I want Mr. Kim, father, to be part of our lives. Sora set aside the math worksheet. Ji-hoon, it's complicated. There's history between our families. I know about the lawsuit. Ji-hoon interrupted. I looked it up online. Grandfather Kim accused Grandfather Park of stealing. But that was them, not us. He adjusted his glasses, the gesture so like Taehyun's that Sora's heart clenched. And father built his own company, just like you built your own career. We're different from our parents. When did you become so wise? Sora asked softly, amazed by her son's clarity. I've always been wise, Ji-hoon replied with a small smile. I get it from both of you. His face turned serious again. Mom, I know you're scared. You always tell me that being brave means doing something even when you're afraid. Maybe it's time for you to be brave too. That night, Sora received a message from Taehyun. Ji-hoon asked to meet me for lunch tomorrow. I told him I needed your permission first. Sora stared at her phone, remembering her son's words about bravery. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. He's your son too. You don't need my permission to have lunch with him. The response came quickly. I respect the boundaries you've set. You've raised an incredible child, Sora. I don't want to disrupt the life you've built. I want to enhance it if you'll let me. The next morning, Ji-hoon dressed himself with unusual care, selecting his best shirt and attempting to style his hair like Taehyun's. Before leaving for school, he turned to Sora. Will you come to lunch with us? Please? I want us to be together, like a real family. We are a real family, Ji-hoon, Sora said gently. Adding someone new doesn't make us more real. No, Ji-hoon agreed, but maybe it makes us more complete. He paused at the door. Father said he's been looking for you for 6 years. Maybe you've been looking for him too, just in a different way. As Ji-hoon left for school, Sora received another message from Taehyun. Whatever happens at lunch, know that I never stopped thinking about you. The connection we had that night wasn't just chance. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. Ji-hoon is proof of that. The upscale restaurant Taehyun chose for their meeting felt too formal for such an intimate conversation. Ji-hoon sat between them, practically vibrating with nervous energy as he looked from one parent to the other. The private dining room silence was broken only by the soft clink of water glasses and distant kitchen sounds. Before we begin, Taehyun said, his voice steady but emotional, I need to tell you both the full truth about that night. He pulled out an old, worn business card from his wallet. Sora, I tried to give this to you at the party. I found it in my pocket the next morning. Never delivered. Sora stared at the card, its edges softened with age. You were going to tell me who you were? Yes, he admitted. But my father called. He'd had a heart attack. I had to leave immediately. When I returned to find you, you were gone. No one knew your name or where you worked. I searched for months. Ji-hoon leaned forward, absorbing every word. But why did? And you recognize Mom when you met her at the agency? Because I never saw her clearly that night, Taehyun explained. The party was dimly lit, and I'd lost my contacts. I was wearing an older pair of glasses that weren't quite right. He smiled ruefully. Like father, like son with the vision problems, it seems. But when did you realize? Sora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment I saw Ji-hoon at the science fair. It was like looking at my childhood photos. Then, seeing you clearly in the daylight, everything clicked. The memories came flooding back. He paused, gathering courage. I didn't say anything because I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I abandoned you intentionally, afraid of disrupting your lives. Ji-hoon spoke up, his voice small but determined. Are you still afraid? Tae-hyun reached across the table, taking his son's hand.
No.
Now I'm only afraid of losing the chance to be part of your lives. There's more you should know, Sora interjected. Your father came to see me. He knows about Ji-hoon and the history between our families. I know, Tae-hyun interrupted. I've already spoken to him. Told him that his grudge ends with his generation. That I won't let the past dictate my future. Our future. He looked at Sora intently. If you want there to be one. Ji-hoon squeezed both their hands. Mom always says that fear shouldn't stop us from doing what's right. And this feels right, doesn't it? Sora looked at her son, their son, seeing both herself and Tae-hyun in his hopeful expression. The walls she'd built over 6 years began to crumble, not with fear this time, but with possibility. Yes, she finally said, her voice growing stronger. It feels right. So, Ji-hoon grinned, pushing his glasses up just like his father. Does this mean we can be a real family now? We already are, Tae-hyun responded, reaching for Sora's hand. We just didn't know it until now. As the afternoon sun streamed through the restaurant windows, the three of them sat together, no longer strangers bound by coincidence, but a family united by choice, love, and the courage to embrace their shared future.